Hi everyone, and welcome back to another Shiny Side Out with Dave
and Mackie.
We're part of Revolution Radio on freedomslips.com. Join our show by joining us in the chat, follow us on Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, and get updates to shows, and check out our website for up-to-date guest information, guest bios, and previous shows, including notes and links so you keep up with us. If you're in the US, call in on 347-688-2902 or add us on Skype by adding Freedom Screen to Skype, and you can join in with the calls.
And we welcome those calls, guys. Really, this is a two-way street, so don't feel shy to call in or join the chat in the chat room, like Dave said.
Yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic.
So what do we have on tonight, Mickey?
Well, tonight we are fortunate enough to, personally, for me, one of the most entertaining and elucidating speakers on the circuit, he has been on the circuit a little while, but Lloyd Pye of Star Child fame and his research into intervention theory and things like that. It's been fascinating to listen to him in person. I've been lucky enough to go to the conference here that he attended some years ago in Australia.
It was a Nexus conference.
That is correct. And then again, a couple of days later at the Litcombe Workers Club. To a select audience, which was also fantastic.
So you saw his show twice?
Yes, yeah. Well, it wasn't so much a show, but really rather a very, very, very interesting talk on the subject at hand. And I think we're very lucky to have him on our show today.
Yeah, actually, I have to say I'm honoured as well because I've been a big fan of the work. I love forefront technology. I love things to give us a different perspective, and as we've found, Mackie, right, in the past, the history books, there's a too hard basket where they find things that they throw it in there, so yeah.
But see, the thing is this, Dave, and sorry to ramble on a bit on this, and then Lloyd will talk about this himself as soon as we get him into here. He has physical evidence. See, Dave and I obviously want to bring you guys physical evidence, scientific evidence. We go wherever the science takes us, okay? And sometimes it goes into the territories that are very hard for some people to follow us in, and that's fair enough. But Lloyd is in possession of physical evidence that is being tested as we speak and has been tested, and the results thus far have been amazing. But let me tell you a little bit about Lloyd. So he's a researcher, an author, and a lecturer. He's known for his entertaining speaking style, to which I can attest. It's true. And his subject areas include intervention theory, hominoids, such as Bigfoot, Yeti, Sasquatch, the Alma, and essentially all those, mysterious cryptozoological creatures that we think are large primates, potentially. Human origins, of course, which is linked, and then, of course, the Star Child skull, which is I guess it's going to take up most of our show today. He was born in Hominoids, Louisiana on September 7, 1946, and he was the eldest of 4 siblings and 8 students. He joined the military during the Vietnam War, yes. He didn't actually go to Vietnam, though, I understand, so, but he can talk about that if he likes to. And he started his writing career early, and by the time he was 30, though, he was convinced there were indigenous bipedal primates on planet Earth, and this is the hominoids we talked about earlier. But he couldn't, prove it himself until he read Zacharias Sitchin, who sort of provided the front end, or the back end to his front end theory. So together, the two theories made sense. Zacharias Sitchin is the author that translated quite a few of the Sumerian clay tablets and spoke at length about the Anunnaki in his books.
Big fan as well.
It certainly opened my mind, I can tell you that. The Star Child skull has not been free of controversy, and if you are familiar with the subject matter, then you know this. I feel, though, with recent discoveries, Lloyd is more than vindicated, and the discoveries that he will talk about are truly amazing. He has written a number of books, and we're going to pop the link to his site into the chat, of course. And
absolutely.
Yeah, he's got a couple of fiction books, that Proper Kid and Mismatch. But then the first book that I actually came across, which happened to be the first one that they published on the subject, was Everything You Know Is Wrong. I was immediately attracted to the title, had to buy it, read it, loved it. The information there was to me was truly astonishing, and someone had taken a scientific approach to the whole subject, and that made it really important for me.
Yeah.
And the Star Child Skull is one. There are also 2 ebooks, Star Child Skull Essentials and Intervention Theory Essentials. Well worth your read. Okay, Dave, without further ado, I think we should get Lloyd in.
Yeah. Welcome aboard, Lloyd.
Well, thank you, guys. That's a very, very comprehensive introduction, and I appreciate it very much. You only left out one book, which I think most people don't know about because it's fairly new posted, so it wouldn't have been on the bio, but it's called Big, just the word B-I-G, and I've taken my years of Bigfoot knowledge and research, and I created actually a screenplay when I worked in Hollywood in the 1980s. And it was optioned actually to be made into a film, but in the end it was aced out by a larger studio with another Bigfoot project called Harry and the Hendersons.
Oh no!
Yeah, and so my script was rendered to the round file, unfortunately. So I took the script and I turned it into a novel, just novelized the screenplay. But it's a very good story, and it's available through Smashwords. It's on, of course, my websites, but smashwords.com. Go put in my name, and then you'll get the books that I have there. There are only 3, and Big is one of them. And if you like Bigfoot and you're interested in that, it's a very good story, very dramatic, very compelling. Bigfoot is being chased by a posse of people out to get it or kill it or captured or whatever, and a high school senior, a girl, a female, a lot of Beauty and the Beast overtones in it, is determined to help it escape ahead of that posse. And it's the chase. It's basically a chase movie. So
sounds good. Sounds really good.
It does sound great.
It is. If you go on the site and you read the reviews, just about everybody said, I didn't think I was going to like this very much, but God, I couldn't put it down, and I read it to my kids and they loved it. It's suitable for teenagers easily, and so there are a lot of good reviews about it on the Smashwords site, and I can guarantee that anybody that gets it would like it very much.
Fantastic. And I'm going to add that, guys, on the radio to the show notes with the links, and you should have no problem at all finding it. So that's my
and while I'm at it, I put a new free one there on the Smashwords as well, and I've been getting such good feedback from it. I did this just recently. I've written 3 basic short stories in my life. Mostly I've written long form, but I have done 3 short stories about animals. One of them is about a turkey that my family raised among dogs, and it grew up thinking it was a dog.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
So that is a very funny story. Then there's a famous story of a monkey in the 1930s in a resort in Florida that escaped from its cage and took up with a group of wild hogs, and this monkey would ride on the neck haunch of the boar that ran through, and he would just grip his hands into the bristles on the pig's neck, and he would ride it like a jockey. So people started coming to this resort in the hope of seeing Oscar ride the hog across the grounds, which he did several times. So that's a cute story. And then the last one is just a long-form narrative poem about a dog that I had. It takes about 20 minutes to read all 3 of them, I would suppose, but it's free. That's the thing. You go there, Smashwords. It's free, but if you like animals and you like stories, stories that make you say, these are 3 really good ones, and everybody will enjoy those as well. So
brilliant. Thanks for sharing that, Lloyd. That's excellent. And in fact, guys, it's free-licious, so go and read it up.
Yeah, free-licious. I can't beat that.
Okay, sorry. What we normally also would like to do with you, Lloyd, and our guests, it is important for our listeners listening to understand that it actually took you, I guess, some time to get to where you are in your life right now. The path would have been very, very difficult, specifically in your case. And we just want you to, I guess, just quickly outline how you came to come into the area of research that you have come to.
Well, it's actually a lot longer story than you would imagine. I started when I was about 20 years old. I was a junior in college at Tulane, and I was in the library one day doing research about something else, the Tulane Library, the university library, and I've just stumbled across this book, and this is 1967. And I stumbled across a book that had been published in 1961. And this book was called Abominable Snowmen, Legend Come to Life by a man named Ivan Sanderson. And it really was the book about hominoids for, up to this day, it's still one of the best ones, and it's 50 years old. So it was really amazing to me to read that book and realize, oh my goodness, these things are not real. They're everywhere. Because all up to that point, everybody only talked about Bigfoot in the northeast corner, the northeast part of the United States, Washington State and Northern California, and some up into Canada. So what he was saying, what Sanderson was saying is no, these things are a worldwide phenomenon, and they are not just one size, the giant kind. There are four kinds. There are four different sizes, four different types, four distinct types based on size and other characteristics. And they're everywhere. They're anywhere in the world that you have dense forest and jungle, and that's their habitat. And we think we live everywhere, that humans have dominance over every part of this planet. And really, we just delude ourselves. Nothing could be further from the truth. We control only about 50%, if that, of the arable land that is there. You take away the oceans, take away the ice caps, take away the deserts, arable land. 50% of that do we live on in the sense of dominating. Another 50% is just covered by forest and jungle and all that. Now, there's a lot of argument that in the past 50 years, we've cut down probably 5% of that forest and jungle. And I don't really argue that point. So, okay, it's 55-45. They still have more than enough room to live in the hundreds of thousands, which they would have to maintain breeding populations around the world and on every continent except Antarctica. And in order to do that safely, they can't be running into us very often, and they're not. Many of them, just like many of us, can live an entire life and never actually see a human. And just the same way we don't see them. So we only interact with them occasionally where the edges of our mutual environments overlap. So that was the discovery that came to me out of that book, and it was like, oh, wow, this is incredible. And so I just got hooked. I just got hooked on hominoids, and I began to try to learn what I could about it. But I was a kid down in Louisiana. There was no internet. There was no way to communicate in the way that we do. There wasn't much being written about it. Really, all told, there wasn't that much, just in a few magazines, specialty magazines, Men and Saga and things like that, and not many books. And so information was sparse, but I got what I could out of it. But I just came to believe as you said in your bio, by the age of 30, I came to believe that hominoids, I just have come to call them hominoids collectively, the four kinds. Hominoids were, in fact, the indigenous upright walking species of planet Earth. And that all of these skeletons, these skeletons that we were being told by mainstream anthropologists were pre-humans. We're talking about the Homo habilis and the early homos and the Australopithecines going further back. And all of them were on their way because they were bipedal, because they were all bipedal, they were all pre-humans. I could not accept that because they looked exactly like the way people described hominoids looking. Everybody that saw a hominoid, it's just like UFOs and aliens. You can't have that many people saying the same thing around the world, no real connection to each other, many of them uneducated, many of them with very little awareness of the outside world, and yet they're all describing essentially the same phenomena wherever you find that in the world. And in fact, with hominoids, because they tend to exist out at the edges of our culture, at the edges of where we live, the people, the humans who do live there, tend frequently not to be that well educated. So they don't even talk about it. They just, it's part of their reality, and they don't talk about it that much. No big deal. There's this thing living out in the woods. It doesn't hurt us. We don't hurt it. Leave it like that. Yeah. That sort of thing. But I was just convinced that they looked like the way people were describing them. They looked like those skeletons that we were being told was us, was our ancestors. I just couldn't believe it. But I had no understanding and no way to prove, no way to lock onto where we did come from. I didn't have an answer. I just had a solution in a way to part of the problem, but I didn't have I couldn't see the whole thing. I didn't have a back into it. And then, as you said, in 1990, a long time later, somebody directed me to the work of Zecharia Sitchin to read The 12th Planet. Now, he had published it in 1976, but I had missed it because it was just out of it bore no relation at all to hominoids, and so I missed it. And I was, of course, making a life, living in Hollywood, living in Los Angeles, trying to, get a career going as a screenwriter and all those things. And so, not until 1990 did someone direct me to, you'd really love this book. It's really interesting. Well, I read it, and a light went off. Boom. This is the answer. This is where we came from. This is where humans came from. It explained it because it was clear to me we were new here. We didn't evolve back into the millions of years from the past. We had to be new here. But I didn't know how we got here. I had no idea how we got here. What Sitchin's book and Sitchin's research, in the 12th Planet particularly, but all of his work, show is that we are new here. We are created here about 200,000 years ago. Now, he published that first in 1976, when absolutely nobody believed we were anything but descended from chimpanzees and then those intermediate stages of the pre-humans.
We were still sprouting Darwinism, yeah?
Well, we still are, for that.
Yeah, that's right.
But at that point, everybody, there was just very little counter to the Darwinian paradigm except for creationism, which nobody of any real sense takes seriously. So it was just all you had pretty much was Darwinian evolution to believe in. So with what what was happening is Sitchin was saying we were genetically engineered by a race of beings that were living on the planet about 200,000 years ago, and they needed slaves and servants, and so genetically they engineered what they wanted at about that time. So he published this in 1976, and everybody just thought, oh, please, ridiculous. How ridiculous can you get? And then in 1986, 10 years later, the mitochondrial DNA research of the human genome showed that, lo and behold, to the surprise of absolutely every archaeologist in the world, was just overwhelmed by the fact that the mitochondrial DNA showed, indeed, about 200,000 years ago, we're as far back as our mitochondria went. So what Sitchin had said in 1976 that sounded absurd beyond imagining was then proven to be 10 years later right on the nose. Now, did science say, whoa, we need to go back and take a look at this guy? No, they didn't, of course. Obviously, that's not an answer and a problem that they want to deal with. They have enough problems as it is without having to open up that can of worms. But nonetheless, there it was. And so I came to it in 90, where it had already been established that Sitchin was right, at least to that extent. So I was very impressed, and it just made sense to me. It just made absolute sense. So then I began to work on what has now, over time, come to be intervention theory, which is one of the e-books that you mentioned that is available, as well as the book Everything You Know Is Wrong that Mekki got and read. And it's all been a slow and steady and very, at times, completely, as you said earlier, completely unexpected twists and turns to get me to the point I'm at, because once I had the Sitchin material and I wrote Everything You Know Is Wrong, and I took it out on the road in 1998, because of that, and because of people hearing me speak and seeing what I was saying and what I was talking about, the couple that inherited the Star Child skull, Ray and Melanie Young from El Paso, Texas, they heard about me. They were members of MUFON, Mutual UFO Network, in El Paso, and so that they were looking for somebody to find out what their skull was. And so the people said, well, you should try Lloyd Pye because he talks about skulls a lot in his work. And I was talking about skulls a lot, the pre-human skulls, and why I thought they weren't ancestors of humans. So that's how the Star Child completely fell into my lap. That was in February of 1999. Up until then, I had very little interest in UFOs and aliens. I saw a UFO when I was 28 years old and living in California. I know that I saw one, high overhead, streaking across a cloudless sky. It wasn't an abduction thing. I had it in view for maybe 10 seconds. It went from 90, my eyes picked it up when it was dead overhead at about 90 degrees straight up, and it hit the horizon about 10 seconds later. So that's like 20,000 miles an hour or something like that. But it was a silver disc. I mean, it was absolutely a silver disc in a absolutely clear sky, no question about it. And at 28 years old, I just had super eyes, and it was just no doubt. That's what it was. But it was like I was with two guys. I tried to point it out to them. I said, look, that's a UFO. And it's like, wow, man. And just we went on about our business like it didn't happen. That's kind of what a lot of people do. So that was it. Well, I had no doubt. I didn't doubt they were real. So it wasn't like one of those epiphanies where I'm going around saying, well, they're not real, they're not real, they're not real, and then I see one. I believe they were real. So for me, it was just kind of confirmation of a belief, and I let it go at that. So from there, once I got to Star Child, I just skewed off. I mean, just a 90-degree turn off into the realm of UFOs and aliens. And so here I am now, as I sit here talking to you, probably the only researcher in the whole field of alternative knowledge with a foot firmly planted in both camps of both hominoid research and UFO alien research. I don't know anybody else that has any high degree of expertise in both of those fields the way I have it. So it's a bit schizophrenic at times, because when you talk, I mean, this is one of the things that puzzles people, but this is in fact the way it is. When you talk to a hominoid crowd, they're there because they, for some reason, believe that hominoids are real. But when you bring up UFOs or aliens to them, a lot of them will be annoyed by the fact that you brought it up, because, well, everybody knows UFOs and aliens ain't real. Bigfoot's real, but UFOs and aliens, I have it on good authority from science that it ain't real, that kind of thing. Well, then you go to a UFO crowd and you talk to them, and you bring up hominoids in that lecture, and you get the same reaction. Well, I'm really on board with your UFO alien stuff, but that Bigfoot stuff, what are you even talking about that for, man? Everybody, that's stupid. That's silly stuff. And it's something makes a person, for whatever reason, committed or convinced that one or the other is real, but not necessarily everyone believes that both sides are real. That both subjects have merit.
And this is really very important, Lloyd, because that's exactly what Dave and I are trying to do. Because we believe there are a lot of interconnections, and we love, by the way, how you weave it all together. It's fantastic. But we believe there are a lot of interconnected subjects, and people just focus on one theory and one field of interest. We need Renaissance men like you, like yourself, to bring disparate or apparently disparate fields together. And this is probably the most important thing when it comes to alternative knowledge, and I don't want to call it conspiracy theory, but it's got negative connotations, but certainly fields of research that are not accepted by current science. So what you're doing is paramountly important, I think.
Mm-hmm. No, we agree on that.
And I would agree with you, too, that more of us need to look at, instead of our individual trees, and this is what I think works against science, and particularly mainstream science, is that each of its practitioners learn a particular tree in the forest of science.
Yes.
And they tend not to have the time, the energy, the interest to go anywhere outside that tree. Now, they learn that tree up one side and down the other, but they have no real concept of the forest. Mm-hmm. And until you try to step back from your tree and get a view of how your tree fits into the other trees and what the forest itself looks like and what might be beyond that, it's hard to make headway, and that's why science grinds ahead so slowly, because everybody in any particular field has to move forward in lockstep. Nobody can be left behind, and so they move forward by inches, and they absolutely refuse to accept anyone who's trying to make a leap forward. Anybody that wants to make a leap in another direction, absolutely not allowed. Mm-hmm. And so science just moves like a snail, when if they would take the chains off and let those people with creative energy and with daring, and if there just wasn't such punishment for being wrong even a little bit, how much further could we move forward to our own destiny of free energy, our different forms of power, all the things that we could do if our scientists weren't so terrified of moving just a little too far forward for comfort for their peers, and have their peers take them down a peg or two or three or four, or whatever happens. And some of them lose their careers if they try to go too far off the reservation. So these are all things that we in the field of alternative knowledge, while not as hindered, because we open it up, we have a very big tent, and we unfortunately have to tolerate a lot of crazies in our tent. Yeah. And that's what holds us back. It isn't that we move forward by inches, it's that we only have one tent, and that has to include the crazies as well. And the crazies, unfortunately, get us all painted by that same brush of wackiness. And so it just becomes hard for people to pick out what has real value, something like the Star Child, which has real value, something like the work of Sitchin, real value. There's plenty of real value subjects and work going and people going on, but we are all inundated by so much garbage. It's hard to pick out the good stuff from the garbage.
Yeah. We believe, and I don't know if you would agree, that the crazies or so-called crazies, I think some of that is actually deliberate misinformation put into the mix to discredit the things we are trying to uncover, if you will.
Mm-hmm. I wouldn't argue with that at all, because there are vested interests in keeping everyone misinformed, uninformed, just downright ignorant. And the word ignorant is not to be equated with stupid. It doesn't mean that you're stupid. It just means you are ignorant of certain facts, and you live your life that way because it's to the advantage of certain people to maintain your ignorance of reality in certain areas of life, and that's how they keep you under control. They get you to do what they want you to do.
We could not agree with you more.
Yeah, that's a fact.
Absolutely. Look, you mentioned a fantastic segue through that, and that is the Star Child skull.
Yeah.
One of the things, you mentioned this before, that the silos, when we found exactly the same thing with Lawrence Gardner described the same thing with the silos of people's knowledge.
Robert Schoch.
When did you talk to Lawrence Gardner?
Oh, no.
Yeah, because I was going to say he died a couple of years ago.
Yeah, he did. And much to our chagrin, we would have loved to talk to him. But every researcher that tries to bring disciplines together has come across this barrier where it's, no, you can't link them. No, I'm sorry, this is, this evidence is actually not accepted by us because it belongs to that field of science, which I think is insane. But tell me when we're on again, Dave.
Oh, okay. Well, I haven't actually stopped it. I'm just going to cut this out.
Okay. Well, before we get on again, I want to tell you guys a great Lawrence Gardner anecdote.
Oh, yes, please.
When I met him in Amsterdam at a Nexus conference in Amsterdam, mm-hmm. I was very excited to meet him because, I'd read his stuff and I had a lot of admiration for him. And he was even ill at that time. You could see he was just cadaverously thin. Mm-hmm. And you could tell that something was not well with him. But anyway, he was there, and he's a very gentlemanly-like guy, always dressed to the nines, and he was known as, in his little world, Sir Lawrence Gardner, right?
Yeah.
Originally, he was Sir Lawrence Gardner. Well, a lot of people complained that he hadn't been knighted by the Queen, even though he had the right to call himself Sir because of his academic achievements. So his first couple of books were printed with the title Sir Lawrence Gardner, and then people started, basically bitching about it. And so he dropped the Sir off and just started calling himself in his books, Lawrence Gardner. But I just thought he was kind of, a regal enough guy to have that name and to own it. So I thought of him as Sir Lawrence. So we get there, and my girlfriend at the time, who was a very witty girl, and we meet him and we talk and we have the speaker's dinner and we get to know him really well. Sit right next to him. It was just very fortuitous. So I got to know him pretty well. So the next day, very next day, she and I are walking along through the lobby of the center where the event was going, and I saw him, and he was talking to somebody, and I just walked past him. And I kind of clapped him on the shoulder to recognize that he's there, I'm here, and I'm saying hi to him. I said, "Hey, bud, how's it going?" Boom, snap, like you would, like Americans tend to do. "Hey, bud, how's it going?" And I snapped him on the shoulder. And we got about 10 or 15 feet away, and my girlfriend was just horrified that I'd been so familiar with him like that. And she said, "That is Sir Bud to you."
Oh,
brilliant. Sir Bud. From then on, we started referring to him as Sir Bud, and I told him that story, and he got a big kick out of it, and he didn't mind being called Sir Bud at all. It was very funny. So anyway.
Oh, that's awesome. Do you mind if we keep that in?
Well, you can, sure. It's fine. I don't know how we can do that. I said, "Bitch, you might have to bleep that out."
Oh, that's okay. Yeah, that's fine. Awesome. Okay, so let's push on.
Yeah, you had a fantastic segue into the Star Child skull, I guess, phenomenon, I want to call it, not just an object, but a phenomenon. The book that you have speaks extensively about the physiological differences, the thickness of the skull, the composition of the skull material. So if you can just maybe give us a bit of background how you have already, to some extent, how you got your hands on it, and then maybe a bit of a journey on how difficult it was. And I appreciate the pain that you went through to get it analyzed.
Well, the Star Child came into my life, excuse me, in February of '99, as I mentioned earlier, when Ray and Melanie Young contacted me and they told me they had something unusual that they wanted me to see. I assumed, because I was strictly into hominoids at that time and human origins, that it would be something to do with hominoids, maybe a track or some spore or just something, whatever. So, but because they were from El Paso, I was kind of, curious, because that's not an area where they are known to be in El Paso area, hominoids. So anyway, I said, well, I'll be there in a couple of months. I'm going to an event in Nevada, so I can swing by and see it then. And they said, fine, we'll see you when you get here. And so I went by and I saw it, and I was very impressed that it was highly unusual. But I wasn't convinced that it was the skull of an alien, because there, in my mind, was too much room for deformity of various kinds. That this could be some kind of deformity that I didn't know about, because certainly I wasn't an expert at that point on anything to do with deformity. It was a surprise. I didn't expect to see that kind of a skull. I knew what a human skull was supposed to look like. They had one right with it. There are two skulls. There's a human skull, and then there's the Star Child skull found with it. So, and by the way, that backstory is that it was found in Mexico. The Star Child was found in Mexico. Two skeletons found by a girl in a mine tunnel. The details of this are covered extensively in the book The Star Child Skull and in the ebook Star Child Skull Essentials. So I won't waste a lot of time going through this backstory, but just to say that these two skeletons were found in a mine tunnel. The girl thought and assumed, as anybody would in 1930, that it was just some kind of a deformity, and so she kept the two skulls as as souvenirs of her trip to Mexico. She was of Mexican heritage, and her family, her parents, were taking her back to their home village that they had come from about 15 years earlier. So she kept the skulls her whole life, assuming that the star child was just a deformity of some kind. When she was dying in the early 90s, she had kept the two skulls in a cardboard box basically in her garage for most of her life. And then she passed it on to some friends, the two skulls, after she knew she was dying. Her husband wasn't comfortable with them. They kept them for 5 years. They weren't that comfortable with them either. And so they knew Melanie, Ray and Melanie Young. They knew Melanie was a neonatal nurse, had been for about 15 years, and that she would not be uncomfortable with a deformed skull in a cardboard box in her garage. So they said, "Would you like to have it?" And she said, "Sure, no problem. We'll keep it, no problem." And and basically have some respect for it. So when Melanie saw it, she said, "Oh no, this is not deformed. This is not your typical standard human deformity. This is too light. The bone is too light. And it's too symmetrical. Everything about it is different, but it's perfectly symmetrical. It's more symmetrical than we're symmetrical, than humans are." So she said, "This is," and she said, if you just look at it, and because remember, her and her husband were members of MUFON, the MUFON knowledge that they had told them a lot about skulls and aliens and what aliens ought to look like. And so Melanie said, if you look at this skull, it looks like it would fit inside the head of a gray alien. It's got the big bulbs at the top. It's got the very narrow middle face heading down to what looks like a very narrow, small chin. She said, I think, to her husband Ray, I think this could be the head of a gray alien, the skull of a gray alien. And so Ray said, well, why don't we try to find out? So they took it to a couple of mainstream credentialed experts there in El Paso, and they both told them, Ray and Melanie, exactly the thing that most experts have tried to convince me, that it's a cradle-boarded hydrocephalic. Mm-hmm. That's its deformity category, cradle-boarded hydrocephalic. And she knew...
Sorry, so that's when they've been nursed and wrapped, is that right?
I was going to explain it.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's okay. Cradle boarding is in primitive cultures when a mother has to give birth and a day or two later be back in the fields working or doing whatever work. The baby has to go with her and has to be somewhere, so they would tended to strap them to a board that they would put on their back. Well, when you put a baby, they would, when I say strap, they would bundle the baby in swaddling around the board so that the baby's kind of pinned down on the board. But they would have to tie their head down to the board as well because the head would just loll around because their necks aren't very strong. So in the pressure of the cloth that they put across their forehead to hold their head down onto the board, the back rear of their head flattens out. It just flattens out like as flat as the board because the bones are so soft. So as it turns out, the human found with the Star Child is a classic example of cradle boarding. If you get either book, I would recommend the e-book because it's inexpensive and the pictures are very clear. You can see the rear of the head of the human is just flat as a board, and if you touch your hand to it, it's as flat as a board. Well, the Star Child doesn't have that. The Star Child couldn't possibly have been cradle-boarded because the rear of its skull, though it's very much flattened out compared to ours, it's just a different design from our heads. It isn't manually flattened because it has its natural convolutions in its bone are still there. So it absolutely never was put on a board. A moron can see this, and yet you take it to experts to this day, and they will tell you, well, it's got to be a cradle-boarded hydrocephalic. Why? Because the rear of the head is grossly flat. A much larger area is flat, and what happens is when you really actually cradle-board a human head, it makes an area of flatness about the size of the palm of your hand. Ignore your fingers and just that circle, the palm of your hand, that's about the size of it. And if you reach around to the back of your head right now, you two guys and everybody listening to my voice, you reach around to the back center of your head, drop down a little bit until you feel a knob back there where your neck connects into your head. That knot is called the inion. Well, in cradle boarding, the flattening can't go past the inion. It always stops just above the inion because the inion is the attachment point for muscles. So to flatten any beyond that point, you'd have to detach the muscles, and of course, that isn't going to happen.
Right.
So the flattening goes from the top of the crown to just above the inion. Well, with the Star Child, the flattening extends way beyond the inion right down to the foramen magnum, which is the hole where the neck, the spine comes into the head, and the neck is wrapped around it. So it just absolutely isn't cradle boarded. The Star Child isn't. Now, as far as hydrocephaly goes, the swelling of the parietals, which is the upper left and right rear of the head, that's your parietal, and there's what's called expansion or bossing of the Star Child's parietals, both of them, but perfect same amounts on either side, with a noticeable dent in the middle, exactly like so many people describe grays as having. So there it is. It's right there. And if it was indeed a hydrocephaly is it's called water on the brain, but it's really brain fluid. It's a buildup of excess brain fluid because as the brain fluid comes in, the valves that allow it to go back out do not work. And so it's a one-way street for the brain fluid. And for spinal fluid comes up in, makes the brain of a victim swell and swell and swell and swell until their brain, until the cerebellum is pushed down through the foramen magnum, both sides of the neck bone coming in and kills the person. So anyway, with the Star Child, it's clear that when you have true hydrocephaly, it blows up like a balloon. There's no one area that's favored over another area. So when you look at that crease in the back of the Star Child's head, again, should be clear to a moron that it just simply wasn't the victim of hydrocephaly. And yet you hear that all the time. They just simply disregard the straightforward facts that it couldn't be either cradle boarding or hydrocephaly. And again, that goes just to this day. You can still read those objections on, say, the Wikipedia discussion of the Star Child. I mean, the critics just won't let it go because it's all they have. They can't really make sense about any other thing. But the truth of the Star Child from a physical standpoint, is that there are 25 major differences between the Star Child skull and a normal human skull. 25 major differences and several minor ones that aren't significant, aren't as significant, but still several of those as well. But the 25 major ones, they are major. I mean, they are major. And here's the real key to the physicality of the Star Child versus a human. There's not a single point of reference, on a human skull that is matched perfectly on the Star Child skull.
I urge our listeners to really go and look at the book, and I can tell you the evidence that was painstakingly put together is fantastic. There's sculpting, there's 3D modeling, there's drawings of composite artists, there's a comparison of statistical information between a human and the Star Child skull. It is. If you want scientific evidence, it is right there in front of you. All you have to do is read it. And Lloyd has to gone through some trouble to put it all together. And it is unbelievable in my mind.
Well, it's not just some trouble. It's like 13 years of ups and downs. You know, really, they're serious ups and downs to try to get this information out to people in an understandable and therefore believable way, so that they understand that this is really, guys, the most important story in the world right now that very few people know about. But that is what's unfolding here with the Star Child. It is that important. It is on a par with anything great that human beings have ever done in the past. You know the way Galileo moved all of humanity, all of the earth, from the center of things to just being a part of things. And that was very traumatic for people to have to get used to. That idea. You saw how the church fought it and all that. That was a very, very traumatic experience for the world to accept that, gee, we're not special in the center of God's creation and all after all. That's Galileo. And then the next big step that changed all of humanity was the Wright brothers putting us into the air. We became a flying species, and the world was reduced to a manageable scale for us. And then the next one was going to the moon, landing on the moon, and making us a spacefaring people. Now, what the Star Child can do is it can make us part of a community instead of just on our own. And this, too, will be hard to deal with and accept and to swallow for a lot of people in the same way that it was with Galileo. But nonetheless, it has to be swallowed, it has to be dealt with, and we have to move on into that new reality because that is just simply where it is. That's what the Star Child is about. That's what it can do. So that's what we're trying to do in all this work, and that's why we don't let it go and we don't just drop it, because we know what the answer is going to be. We've already established it at a partial level, and so we're very excited about trying to conclude it, getting it concluded, so that we all can move into that next phase of the existence of humanity on planet Earth.
And on that, just quickly, listeners, if anybody's out there with deep pockets, we would really, really appreciate, and this is actually in the interest of humanity, believe it or not, if somebody could come forward and help fund this endeavor.
Well, it isn't just somebody listening, but if anybody listening knows anybody,
of course,
nature with who would just like to have the information presented to them. I mean, we can back up everything that we're saying. To satisfy and convince anyone that will just come take a look at it. It's just we have all that physical evidence that we just talked about, which really in the world of science means absolutely nothing for as significant as it is. And let's just talk about some of those differences before we move into genetics so that people understand. I mean, we're talking about a skull that has eye sockets. Normal human eye sockets are about 2 inches deep. Star Childs are about 1/4 inch deep, and yet they're perfectly symmetrical. What kind of eye sits in a 1/4 inch deep eye socket? Not an eye like ours, for sure. If it does, it bugs off the face like a frog. So there's got to be some kind of a very different eye in that skull than, at least from what we have. No sinuses, no frontal sinuses. Pretty big difference. Most people have at least a vestige, even if you're born without sinus. They show what are called vestige nubs, where your body at least knew it was supposed to grow sinuses there. Nothing, just absolute emptiness in the Star Child. That knot at the back of the head that we all have. I mean, on Earth, if you have a head sitting on a neck, sitting on a body, you've got an Indian at some point on your skull where your neck muscles are attaching to the bone of your skull. That is just a reality. Larger, smaller, higher, lower, but they're there. Star Child doesn't have one. And in fact, it's got a dent, a noticeable, almost 1 inch across dent where that knob is on our heads. Very, very different. I can go through all 25 of them, but the one I want to focus on that is most impressive to me and to everybody really is the difference in the bone.
Yes.
Now, the bone itself is anywhere from half to less than half as thick as normal human bone, and it weighs overall about half of what a normal human skull weighs. It's very, very different in the hand. And yet, it's 2 or 3 at least times harder. We don't know how hard it is because we don't have the means to measure the difference yet. But I've watched the skull be cut 4 different times. And I've cut it once myself by hand with a little handsaw. And I can tell you, every time someone cuts it, their first reaction is, gee whiz, this is hard, compared to the bone. And when I did it, it was like cutting the bone, and then cutting the Star Child was like cutting sheet metal. It's so much harder, stronger. Now, why is that? Because it is not like human bone. It is like human bone that is found in your tooth enamel. The whole of its bone is very heavily overloaded with collagen. And collagen is what gives bone its connectedness and its hardness, and so you have an overabundance of collagen in your teeth. When you, for example, get your teeth drilled by a dentist and you smell that funky burning smell, that's the smell of burning collagen. That's your enamel burning, and that's the collagen burning in your enamel. So biochemically, the Star Child's bone, all of its bone, is like our teeth. And there's just no question about it. But also, to add even more strength, there are fibers, some kind of small fibers, unusual fibers, different kinds of fibers, woven through the matrix of the Star Child's bone the way you put rebar through concrete. And these fibers are very durable. I mean, you saw the pictures. You saw how they were shredded off at the ends by a Dremel blade.
Absolutely.
And a Dremel blade would cut your arm through at the wrist like butter.
Yeah.
And yet these fibers resisted that blade as it was cutting through. So it's an amazing set of statistics and facts that go with the Star Child's bone, but all of these physical aspects, guys, you have to understand, all of these physical aspects mean nothing to science. Absolutely.
That's incredible.
Because all they say is, well, nature can do anything. Nature can do anything. You can't throw enough of this at us that we can't say nature can do anything. It's no different than arguing with religious fanatics who, when you hit them with things they can't answer about the Bible or religion or whatever, they just say, well, God can do anything. I don't have to answer this. I do not have to answer this because God is a higher authority and God can do anything. Well, science is the same way with nature. I don't have to answer this because nature is a higher authority and nature can do anything. So it came down to either find the way that you can get some DNA evidence or forget about it. Well, when we started doing this in 1999, 2000, 2001, the only way it could be done was with something called primers. And primers were stretches of DNA that were designed from known stretches of DNA. So when you came right down to it, they knew they had us over a barrel because if it was human, if it was human DNA, it would be recovered as human DNA. And if there were problems recovering it, well, you could just say it's just, bad DNA, bad recovery, whatever. But there was no way to make primers that would recover alien DNA because there was no sample of it. Right? So we were pretty well hamstrung for all those years. We tried a couple of tests just to see what would happen, and good things did not happen. But because good things did not happen, the mainstream jumped all over it and said, oh, well, you can't, the Star Child's a human, and that's it because it doesn't do right, and it's just, and again, you still read those kind of critiques today. You don't read any critiques about the most recent DNA that we've had done after the what's called the next generation machines came online. Now, those next generation machines, what they do is they do away with primers. You don't need primers anymore because they will recover DNA at the base pair level. They will, imagine, if you will, a skyscraper, and it's built of bricks, right? Well, the human genome is 3 billion plus base pairs. 3 billion plus base pairs. Imagine it's a skyscraper there, and you've got 3 billion plus bricks into it. Let's say the Empire State Building or something like that. Well, these machines can break down and tell you what every single brick is in the building. not so much its relationship to anything else, just it's brick by brick by brick by brick. It's amazing technology. Don't bother trying to figure it out. I can't really figure it out. It doesn't matter. It works. That's what counts. It works. So you can take the Star Child's DNA now, as alien as it might be, and you can run it through these machines, and they will tell you what the Star Child is made of, brick by brick by brick. And that is what we need done for its entire genome, whatever that genome is going to be, and we assume it's going to be in the range of 3 billion because a human is around 3 billion, a Neanderthal is around 3 billion, a Denisova is around 3 billion, chimps, gorillas, all around 3 billion, up or down. So we assume, but may be wrong, but assume the Star Child is going to be in the range of 3 billion. But when I finally got a geneticist in early 2010 to contact me and say, look, I'm willing to help you. I think you might have something here, and I have access to next generation technology, and I can't do the whole genome for you because that costs a few $1 million, and it still does. Now, people shouldn't be confused about one thing. I get emails all the time with people saying, what do you mean asking for so much money when I read just the other day that I could have my own genome done for $10,000? Well, yeah, that's living DNA where all the parts are still strung together and work correctly. That's easy for the machines to do. They just unravel it like a coil of rope and begin to go. With something that's been dead for a very long time, like the Star Child, 900 years plus, then everything about it is desiccated and degraded and contaminated by the bacteria of death, the bacteria that consume you when you die. So that's the problem that the Neanderthal genome project faced and overcame over 6 years and $30 million or whatever it was. And they've done it with Denisova the same way because those are answers that they want. But with the Star Child, not an answer they want. So we're responsible for coming up with the money to pay for it. So it is extremely expensive. But he said, I can do shotgunning for you. And shotgunning is where I'll just send in and hope to hope to recover something that is of value. It's a shotgun approach. It's just random, right? So in the human genome of the 3 billion base pairs, now understand where that comes from. That comes from all the chromosomal material that your mother supplies to you and all the chromosomal material that your father supplies to you. That's 23 chromosomes from each to make a total of 46 chromosomes. All of that is wound up in these tight ladder-like contraptions that are wound up in the nucleus of your cells. Of all of the trillions of your cells, each nucleus has your whole genome in it, and your whole genome consists of those 3 billion plus base pairs. It's very, very complicated, but only about only about 3% of that 3 billion actually does the work and the functioning of your body. About 97% of it doesn't work. It's non-coding, non-working, or a term I know you've heard, everybody's heard, junk DNA. It's junk DNA. So 97% is junk, where it doesn't really tell you anything. You have to get something out of that working 3%. So the odds are really very much against you when you attempt to shotgun into the genome.
That you're going to hit that 3%.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, what you need is to hit the 3%, but the odds are way against you. And sure enough, the first several times that he did it, he struck every time out in the junk. But what you do is you're getting recoveries. You're still getting something you can sequence. And as he did, he got dozens of them, and it added up to over 30,000 total base pairs, over 30,000, quite a few. And when they're, at 200, 300, 500, 700, 800, 1,000, like that, each fragment is that length. But added in the aggregate, it's over 30,000. So it's quite a few. And it was enough to send in to the NIH database, the National Institutes of Health, to find out what those fragments, how those fragments might relate to other life forms on Earth. Well, sure enough, some of those fragments came back as having corollaries in the human genome, so that it's safe to say that some of the star child's genome has corollaries that are human-like. It also has corollaries, therefore, that are Neanderthal-like, chimp-like, gorilla-like. It doesn't really pin it down to being human or part human. It's not, but it's human-like. But then others of those fragments, when they would go through the NIH, and it would come back and say, no significant similarity found. Now, we're asking for any similarity to anything, not exact, just similar. Got any similarities here?
And you're not just asking for human either, just anything.
And we're not for human, absolutely anything in the database. There's 120 species types and, millions and millions of base pair, coherent base pair strings in that database. And the answer's coming back, no significant similarity found, meaning not found here, not found necessarily on Earth even. So we knew right then that we were on the right track and that we could recover and that we could find interesting results. But that wasn't really going to convince anybody because the sample was just too small. 30,000 is 0.001% of 3 billion.
Wow.
It was just too small to extrapolate out and make any sense of it at all that anybody would respect. So he kept trying, and then he lucked into a connection where he hit into the mitochondrial DNA. Now, everybody needs to understand this. Separate from the nucleus in your cells, separate entirely, floating outside the cells, within the cell wall, but not in the nucleus, are what's called mitochondria. And the mitochondria are very different than the working part inside the nucleus. The mitochondria are the power plants. They do an awful lot of the work of the cells. And they are they're anywhere from dozens to hundreds of them, depending on the cell in your body. Brain cells different from bone cells, different from blood cell, like that. But the mitochondria are in there for all of them, helping them to function. So they are all of them, wherever they're found, they are all the same size, 10,569 base pairs, 10,569 base pairs.
Wow.
And they come from the mother, isn't that correct, the mitochondrial DNA?
And yes, they pass down from the mother because when a sperm meets an egg, a sperm is just the wad of the 23 chromosomes with a tail on them. When they hit the egg is bringing the 23 chromosomes from the mother in the egg, and in the cytoplasm of that egg, it's bringing the mitochondrial DNA. So mitochondria passes down only through females, and that was how they were able to create what's called the biological clock to go back and determine the 200,000 year date for when we, the way we are, came to be, is because they're able to clock that the number of mutations in the mitochondrial DNA, and we want to talk about that because that's where it starts to get interesting with the star child. Over those 200,000 years, the mitochondrial DNA have not changed much. Now, why? So that you can clock the changes, and therefore you can determine how the haplogroups developed and all that. I'm not going to bother people with trying to explain that. You can read the book and get an understanding.
That's okay. That's it. Exactly. Our listeners understand the base mother.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, what matters is that those 10,569 base pairs, of them, about 3% don't work. 97% of that works.
Wow.
So what that means is it's very highly conserved. And conserved means changes aren't allowed, because if there is a mutation in the working part of it and a fetus is growing, that fetus is not going to make it to term. There's going to be a spontaneous abortion, and that'll be it. Right? And so very few of the mutational errors find their way into the 3% that don't cause damage, that don't cause critical damage. So over time, over those 200,000 years, the maximum that humans have accumulated are 120 mutations or differences in those, among those 10,000. Now understand this, of the 10,569 humans, the oldest of us, have 120 maximum.
That's incredible quality control.
Most of us, you and I and the rest of us, have anywhere from 50 to 60, 70, whatever, but the oldest of us are black Africans from South Africa. Black Africans from South Africa, and guess what? Sitchin also said not only were humans created genetically 200,000 years ago, but that it was done in South Africa, and that the first humans were black South Africans, the black-haired people.
Yeah.
It's exactly what has turned out to be the case through genetic studies. So Sitchin was right on the money in 1976, just retranslating the Sumerian texts in cuneiform. And so, I mean, Sitchin, that whole thing is another area of discussion. But just so that we understand about the variations, 120 maximum for humans. With Neanderthals, that number of variations grows a little bit to 200. In the mitochondrial DNA of Neanderthals, they have 200 mutations. In this new pre-human type creature that was found in 210, the Denisova, the way they found it was they found a finger bone. It looked like a Neanderthal. They double-checked it just to see, and its mitochondrial DNA came in not at 200, but at 385.
Wow.
185 variations, right? So that was pretty shocking. And so they went in and they got what looked like a different tooth, and to double check, and sure enough, 385. Off of those two tests alone, those two mitochondrial tests, they announced that there was a new type of pre-human hominid like Neanderthal, but different, now it's called Denisova, based on the mitochondria. Why? Because the mitochondria is so closely controlled, quality control, as you say, so highly conserved, that there was just no way to excuse it. You go from 200 to 385, that's a different species. Just like you jump from 120 to 200, you go from humans to Neanderthals, you're looking at something different, right? Yes. So our guy collected 4 fragments of the star child's mitochondrial DNA. Mitochondrial DNA, just like human, Neanderthal, Denisova, chimp, gorilla, whatever. And when he sequenced it and looked at what it was made of, he found that those 4 fragments added up to about 1,500 base pairs, a little bit over, but 1,553, I think it was, base pairs. So that's 9.5%. Now, this is not 0.001%. This is 9.5%. This is a significant number. It's nearly 10%. You can extrapolate. Any statistician will tell you can extrapolate pretty accurately when you're close to 10%. So you do 9.5%. Those combined 1,500, they already have 93 mutations in those 1,500. If you extrapolate that out to the full 10,569, in other words, if you extrapolate out and assume that same average, that same percentage of error is going to continue on for the rest of the star child's mitochondrial DNA, and there is no reason not to believe that, then what do you get? You get a range of mutations that will fall within 800 to 1,000. 800 to 1,000 differences in the star child's mitochondrial DNA. Now, can you imagine how old that race of beings will turn out to be? Very, very old relative to Earth life on Earth, which is only, 500 million years old in non-bacterial form. So anyway, we're looking at something quite astonishing here when you think about it. Now, where are chimps? Chimps are out at 1,500. So chimps are very different. So let's look at the flow here of these mutations. You've got humans at 120. You've got Neanderthals at 200. You've got Denisova at 385, and you've got chimps at 1500. And in between them, you've got the star child laying somewhere between 800 and 1,000.
That's astonishing.
It is. It's
It really is.
absolutely mind-boggling. And so, and of course, what the mainstream will say, well, you only have 4. You got to repeat it over and over and over again to make sure you can't have any errors. Well, that's true. No, I mean, you know, in a deal like this, we accept, we understand. It's so big, you have to do it that way.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, it's clear where the flow is going here. The tide is moving in our direction, if you see what I mean. Now, even then, now with all of that, for as strong as that was, as strong as the mitochondrial DNA was, there was still more to go because he had not found something in the working part of the mitochondrial DNA. And he came to start referring to it as the golden needle. I've got to find a golden needle. I've got to find something that tells me about its functioning because the junk just nobody knows. We've got to pull something out of that working 3% of the star child or however large its working area is. I've got to pull something out that I can recognize and compare to humans and Neanderthals and things like that. So the golden needle it is, and he's looking for the golden needle and not finding the golden needle, not finding the golden needle. And then one day he lets me know, he calls and he says, not only did I find a golden needle, I found a diamond needle.
This is astonishing stuff.
Yeah. You're not going to believe how good this is. And I said, well, tell me about it. All right, well, in that 3%, that works in the genome, in the 3 billion base pairs, we're talking about 90 million, give or take, base pairs that do the work of our body. Now, that is wrapped up and controlled by approximately 25,000 genes. They think we have in the range between 20 and 30,000, so let's just call it 25,000 genes, things that actually do something, make a protein, something that can be accounted for. Over and above those standard genes are what are called master genes. And master genes are genes that control the downward flow of hundreds of other genes. So that in these few master genes, if anything goes wrong, it's a disaster because the wrongness is going to flow down through whatever among those hundreds of other genes that particular one mutation is going to affect. So where mitochondrial DNA is very highly conserved, these master genes are very, 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 very highly conserved.
So there's no error allowed. There's no mutation allowed, essentially, right?
Pretty much. None allowed in the master genes, except in the one that he recovered. It's called FOXP2, forkhead box P2, FOXP2. And the FOXP2 gene is one of the most important in our bodies. Not just a master gene, it's one of the most important because it functions in creating our heads, our brains, our throats, our ability to speak, our esophagus, our lungs, our guts, our core. Our core is, the FOXP2 overlooks it. And not just us. There are FOXP2 variants in everything with a head, a torso, and limbs. Everything. FOXP2 is one of nature's most important genes. And our geneticists recovered a fragment from the FOXP2. Now, the FOXP2 gene is about 2,500 genes long, about 2,500, I think it's 2,555, or anyway, 2,500, let's call it that. The fragment he recovered is 211 base pairs long, 211. That's 8.5%. Of star child's FOXP2, give or take whatever its length is, but it would be 8.5% of the human FOXP2. But we assume it's going to have the same kind of FOXP2, and it's going to have the same kind of very, very high level of conservation. Now, in human beings, there can be one of those 2,500 one of those can go wrong. One mutation is allowed, and that person will be born and live and function and be fine in every other way, except they can never speak.
Right.
One mutation takes out your ability to speak.
Mm-hmm.
All right? So, but in all of us who are normal, everybody, you who are listening, me, everybody here in the States, everybody there in Australia, everybody everywhere who is normal, they have the same exact 2,500 base pairs in their FOXP2 genes, or they're not living. They're not one of us, right?
Yeah, yeah.
They have the same. There is no mutations allowed in the FOXP2 for normalcy. Now, with that said, in other species, of course, there are differences from the human.
Mm-hmm.
So what our guy did, what our geneticist did, was he just picked some random samples, because in humans, all of us have the same exact array of those 211. And you can go on the ebook and on the website, and you can see this chart, so you can see that, you know, there's an essay about this called New DNA. If you go on the website, starchildproject.com, you can read about this new for free, new DNA essay. You can see the picture that I'm describing and all that. But nonetheless, it has the 211 of a human and some other species. Well, in that 211 in all humans, it's the same. In all Neanderthals, it's the same. In Denisova, it's the same.
Right.
In all chimps, it's the same. In all gorillas, it's the same. It doesn't change that 211 fragment. Now, that's not to say that chimps don't have difference. They do, and so do gorillas. But what I'm saying is that 211 base pair fragment that he got, they're not many. There are not many differences. So in that fragment, you don't see changes until you get out to rhesus monkeys, where you see a couple. Rhesus monkey has two.
Mm-hmm.
Then you go to a dog, an elephant, a possum, and you see in the range of 20, 25, 20. I think a frog has 27 or a dog has 27, something like that.
That's right, yeah.
And that's it. And then you look at the star child in that 211 base pair segment. It has 56 differences.
Now, we're talking about pairs, right? So this is almost like 50%, isn't it?
No. I have that number in the book. Is I have 50%. I need to change that. It's 25%.
Right.
Because it's not pairs. It's single. I had gotten confused on it, but it's single, and I do need to make that correction. But the point is, 56 is 1/4 of 211.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it's 56 individual mutations, individual changes. So that is so far beyond what is normal, what is acceptable. It's just incredible. So
this child shouldn't be able to live, right, by our definition, really.
Not as a human being. Obviously, as a whatever it was, as a gray or whatever it was fine. It was healthy. It lived. Its teeth showed wear. It was living a life. And its skull had knitted well, and so it was living a life. But it's not us. It's not a human being. It is an alien being. And so, you know, it's without fail now, we can prove that. And we can prove it in a way that science will just simply not be able to dispute. So we're very, very excited about the results that we have up to now, but where we are very disheartened and very discouraged, obviously, is that we can't, because science won't roll in behind it and pat us on the back and say, yeah, good job, these guys are really doing great work. That isn't what they want to hear. It's hard to convince people with money to invest in this, because one of the first questions they say every time is, well, if this was real, why don't I know about it already? Why isn't science already behind it? Well, it's a chicken-egg thing.
It is.
If you already knew about it, we wouldn't need your help. You know, we can't. Science has to be pushed into a new direction. They never, ever, ever jump from one paradigm to another on their own. They have to be drugged by the heels, kicking and screaming the whole way. That's how science works. So we're ready to do that. We have everything to do that, except the people with the deep pockets who will believe in what we're doing, who will just take a look, really. All you got to do is just pretty much take a look and study it a little bit. You guys have looked at it and seen it. I mean, it's there. It's obvious. And if they sign a non-disclosure agreement, they can go to the lab and meet the geneticist. Not a problem. We're as above board with this as we can possibly be. We don't advertise our geneticist's name. We don't advertise his lab, because everybody knows as soon as that were to happen, his peers would just drop down on him like a ton of bricks, and that would be, he'd very likely lose his job. They would demand that somebody so insane as to help prove that aliens exist was not worthy of a job. So we have to be really, really careful protecting his identity.
Absolutely. Hey, Lloyd, do you mind if I ask you a question? I wanted to do a little sum up, right, and ask a question at the same time. All right. So with the physiology of the skull itself, it's different. The thickness of the skull, the composition of the skull, and you didn't mention the carbon, the amount of carbon difference, but the enamel is certainly there.
The collagen, not carbon, but collagen.
Oh, really?
Yes.
I thought
collagen is carbon is high in it as well, but collagen is the material that makes your teeth hard.
Yeah.
And if that's what you're referring to, yes.
Yeah. Okay. So what also is there? And we're talking. I wanted to ask you a question about the brain capacity.
Yes.
Right. The brain capacity of the skull, of the Star Child skull, should be in the range of about 1,200 cubic centimeters, because it is actually slightly smaller than our average skull. It's the skull of about a 5-foot tall adult, or about a typical 12-year-old. It's a little bit smaller than ours. So assuming you're normal size, I am, our skulls normally contain a brain volume of about 1,400 cubic centimeters. 1,400 cubic centimeters. The Star Child should have about 1,200 cubic centimeters. And in fact, the human found with it, who was indeed an adult of about 5 feet in height, had a brain capacity of about 1,200 cubic centimeters, as measured by flaxseed poured into the cranial capacity, and then poured out into a measuring device. And so when they did the Star Child, they were expecting it to be 1,200 cubic centimeters, give or take. And what they found was instead 1,600 cubic centimeters, fully 1/3 more than should have been in there. 1/3 more, that's an awful lot. And 200 cubic centimeters more than we have. And when you have a brain leap in the pre-humans of 200 cubic centimeters, you're looking at a new species no matter what.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, so the brain, now that's the brain volume. More importantly, because of the way the Star Child's skull is shaped, with that very steep incline in the rear, if you look at a picture of it, if you look at a picture of it, you'll see what I'm talking about. It slopes from those enlarged parietals straight back down toward the foramen magnum neck hole. And so you have this great extra volume of brain and weight pressing down at a much steeper angle onto cerebellum, if indeed the Star Child has a cerebellum, and there's no guarantee that it does. It could have a brain completely different from ours. It could have a 3-lobed brain for all we know.
Yeah.
We don't know, but what we can say is that the inside of its head, the inside rear of its head, is not like ours. And it allows for a much steeper incline for the brain in there. And one of the brain specialists that explained this to me, he was showing me and explaining it to me, says, this thing can't possibly have a brain like we have, because if it's made of the same brain material that we have, pitched at this angle down toward the foramen magnum, it's going to slide right out and kill it. It could not have lived. So the fact that it lived on into adulthood at least, and forget the name Star Child. We misnamed it that at the beginning when we were told that it was probably going to be a child because it was small and a number of reasons, but it isn't. It was an adult.
That was one of our questions coming too.
Yeah, so he said that brain and that head cannot be made of the same material as ours. It has to be a much firmer, denser material so that it can't be, its own weight can't push it out the foramen magnum hole. So he said, you got a very weird brain in that head. So that's pretty much the answer to the brain question. It's much bigger and it's much stronger and in every way looks to be incredibly different from our brains.
I'd seen something before that you'd, I think it was 1999, one of your presentations, and you had a row of skulls you were displaying on the screen, and they went from Neanderthal through to human, well, pre-human, and you were talking about the brain capacity and that capacity is not always linked to intelligence, but because ours reduced.
Exactly. From relative to Neanderthals, we came down at least 100 cubic centimeters. They're more like 1,500 to 1,600 cubic centimeters, and we're 1,300 to 1,400 cubic centimeters. So we definitely have smaller brains than Neanderthals, but where we carry those differences are very different. We carry our increased capacity in our frontal lobes and our foreheads. If you look at a Neanderthal skull, they carry theirs down around that back, where I was having you to touch that lump. They have an expanded area back there that's called the occipital bun, and they carry theirs in that bun back there. So the question is, what function does it have relative to what we don't have? What did it have we don't have? And it's clear what we have that they didn't have, which is, frontal lobes in the forehead. So it's a very different design between us and Neanderthals, which is why I don't think that Neanderthals are pre-humans at all. I think they're hominoids. But regardless, it shows how different the star child is going to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And look, that was one of the... For me, that was the shining light because it changed the perspective that I had. All of the evidence, all of the scientific evidence that you've presented already, and I'm already over the line with it, so I agree wholly with everything that you found. And I still, we noticed that about a 30-year, we've seen prevalence of this, about a 30-year gap or a little larger than that where evolving technology that blows science away is being resisted. And it can only resist for a certain amount of time. So what I'm going to ask next is, okay, so we've got the brain science, we've got the composition of the material.
We have a question which is maybe taking it quite far. Is this where you're going, Dave?
Yeah, it is.
Okay. Now,
you can do this one.
Oh, okay. And we were thinking, and because when I was reading through the material anew, it appeared to me that, okay, we know there was potentially a human mother, considering there was a mitochondrial DNA. The father was not human. We're pretty sure about that. But then another option was raised by you, Lloyd. And if I understood, and I want to make sure I understood it correctly. However, so this is how it goes. Is it possible, right, that you're referring to a potential surrogate scenario where
it's possible that there would have been a third parent.
Yes.
It's possible, and I do go over that in the book, in the ebook, and I've left that there. I've left everything in the ebook as the ebook has evolved as we have learned new things, and I'm clear, I think, to point out that in the old version this is what it said, just so everybody's up to speed. Well, in the older versions, there was a time when we were trying to figure out how you could have a human mother and a non-human father and get a being that had no trace of the mother in it. No physical trace of the mother in it. How could that happen? That's back when we were still believing, up to 210, when we were still believing the DNA test of 2004, 2003 rather, which turns out to have been wrong. So now we know that that isn't the case. It's not a hybrid. A human had nothing to do with it in terms of mother or as a surrogate. It's just simply an alien. Based on the latest DNA results that we have, it's just simply an alien. It ended up here some way, somehow. It crashed. It came to visit. Couldn't get away before it died. I have no idea. All I know is I'm very confident that the evidence that we have of its DNA so far is so radically different that there's no way that we can call it human. I mean, it's just not even in the ballpark of human, not of Neanderthal, not of Denisova. It pushes more toward chimp than it does human. I mean, it's just not human. There's no other way to say it. And over time, as we collect the full genome and can see what other surprises, because it's like the geneticist says, every time I go in here, I'm surprised. Every time I go in here, I find things I couldn't have expected to happen. And it'll be that way on a massive scale when we go in after the mitochondrial DNA. And that's going to happen.
That's incredible. So we really are dealing with let's call it what is like an alien DNA, because the differences for our listeners of the DNA and what has been analyzed so far is just significantly, it's just too significant. 25% in the 211 base pairs, and then if you talk about the mitochondrial, there are thousands, potentially 800 to 1,000 differences, whereas the chimp has 1,500. And look, these are big numbers. I mean, this is
well, wait, here. Let me. Maybe I didn't make it clear with the FOXP2. The FOXP2 is the most reliable. Not that the other stuff isn't reliable, but get this. This is the most reliable measure of alien. The fact that in that 211 fragment, which is 8.5%, you have 56 differences. If you extrapolate that out to the full size of the FOXP2 genome, guess how many differences you have? About 600.
And nothing. We're not looking at the similar DNA being discovered on Earth that has that many changes. Yeah.
Yeah. There's nothing. Again, dogs 27, frogs 25, 26, whatever. Nothing goes up that high. The star child, when its FOXP2 is completely recovered, and not just the FOXP2 but its whole genome, it will be totally, utterly, shockingly, staggeringly unlike anything ever seen on Earth before.
I really hope that this information, when it finally comes to light, will not be suppressed, but there will be a headline somewhere, someone sent me a news report, a documentary, whatever.
Well, I tell you what, Amy and I are working right now on trying to put out a new YouTube video, a short video, 5 to 10 minutes, capsuling what you and I have been talking about for the past 2 hours.
Oh, brilliant.
Just so people can have a chance to see it on a video and share it with their friends, because part of what we have to do, obviously, is get the word out, and a good YouTube video, we think, is the way to go. So you can look for that, hopefully, in the next few days.
Oh, look, we'll link that in ours as well. Our show goes on air, and we also have it on YouTube as well.
Yeah.
So I'm happy to put that in a link down the bottom.
That'll be great.
Yeah.
We'll make it viral. Don't worry about it. We'll make it viral.
Okay. Sounds good. We're going to need all the virility we can get.
No, look, but this is the truth, though. I mean, we've been discussing knowledge filter without mentioning it for the entire almost 2 hours now. And there is an active knowledge filter that goes on, and it's the truth. I mean, I know personally of scientists that used to be an archaeologist, for instance, a lady, and she now sells flowers because she found something that didn't agree, and it wasn't a major thing, but she found something it didn't agree with mainstream science, and now she's a florist.
So that would be, I think that's the lady from the dig in Mexico, the first American, Kristen Hardica. I love that woman. Listen, I love that woman. I love that book. That is a great book. If anybody wants to read a book about that really highlights the malfeasance of mainstream science at its very, very worst.
Yes.
It's called The First American by Christopher Hardiker, and it tells you a story about the beginnings of humanity or whatever in the Americas, and it's so different from what the mainstream wants you to believe. Virginia Steen McIntyre, that's her, Virginia Steen McIntyre, and she was the lady that got the dates where our establishment in 1968, when they were 67, 68, when they were making these discoveries, our establishment insisted that you couldn't have anything in the Americas prior to the last ice age at around 10,000 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
It was called Clovis First.
Yeah.
And to this day, they still try to defend Clovis First tooth and nail, even though she and others found that you have evidence of human-like beings, if not humans, going back about 250,000 years, when the very first humans would be on Earth. So, in South Africa. So, it's very, very controversial material, but it is told in a great book. The First American, I have nothing to do with it. I just am a huge fan of it, and those of you who like to read, I write good things. You're welcome to read mine, but if you want to read a really good one outside of what I do, you can't go wrong with The First American.
And this is really important. And we will put that link in as well, guys, and then tell you exactly what it is. And it's just, see, when we talk to people, friends, acquaintances, and the common standard reply to any of this is, well, it has to come out one day, or how come I haven't heard about it, or, well, science doesn't do that. Science wants to know stuff. And I keep saying, well, up to a point that is true, if it's allowed, if it's not controversial, if it doesn't upset the status quo, and it's really important to remember that.
Right.
It's upsetting.
They want to know only the next little bitty 1 inch out in front of them.
Yes.
So that they can all move forward in lockstep and nobody gets left behind. When you have a leap forward, a lot of people are going to get left behind, and they don't want to go back to the drawing board, and they don't want to admit they don't know something. And there's so many things working against science accepting something like this without a knockdown, drag-out fight. It's just the way it's going to be.
You're 100% correct. I would love to cover some more things as well, if that's okay with you. Like I said earlier, everything you know is wrong. The book that initially made me aware of your existence, Lloyd, and your research, blew me away. And there are a number of things in it that just resonated with me, because I had been thinking along similar lines, but I couldn't quite put it like you did, not as eloquently at least, and certainly not with all the research that you had done. But one thing that sticks out in my mind was the cheetah mystery, which I found astonishing, right? And if you wanted to elaborate on that, but yep.
Well, just real quick, the whole argument, the Sitchin argument, is that humans were genetically engineered.
Yeah.
But as you read and everything is wrong, it's not just humans.
Yeah.
The Anunnaki, when they were here, they needed things to, quote, their term was, give the gods their ease. The GODS multiples with a small g, they just called themselves the gods. Yeah. To give the gods their ease, meaning to make their life easier. Well, one thing you need is a slave and a servant to do your grunt work first. Yeah. So they built one of those. But they also needed other things, like, for example, plants and animals. So you have, among the plant and animal world, you have what are called wild or natural, and then you have domesticated. You have domesticated plants, you have domesticated animals. And they've always been a mystery, because, like, how did they get domesticated? Who did that? And they make up these incredible stories about how cavemen had to do it, Well, it's like building the pyramids. It's just impossible for the people of the time to do that. So, when you look at the genetics of the plants and the animals, you see very clearly, just like when you look at us. We didn't talk about it. We maybe do it another time, but there's plenty of evidence in our genome itself, in our chromosomes, that we have been genetically engineered. All higher primates have 48 chromosomes. We have 43, but we have the same package that the 48s have. We just have a fusion of two of our chromosomes, so you get the same package, but in a lower number. Why? so you could have reproductive sex with a species that has 46 chromosomes, which is probably what the Anunnaki have. But anyway, you get down to the cheetah. Now, the cheetah is one of the most unusual animals in the world because it is one of the most clearly genetically designed animals in the world. It is designed to do one thing: hunt for humans and bring back food, and bring back food in good-sized quantities. They are designed different from all cats. They have things that all the big cats don't have. They are the fastest land animal, 70 miles an hour top speed. They have like a gyroscope in their head so that they can stay focused on the springboks and gazelles and things that get, that are their main prey. They are the easiest to train. They are the most docile of the big cats. They are the easiest to, housebreak and train and bring them in from the wild and tame them. There's just no records of cheetahs ever attacking humans. It's just they are an amazingly designed animal to be a pet hunter. Like we have falcon hunters now. Well, in the old days, back in the old days, the cheetahs were the hunters for the humans. Now, the problem with a cat foot going 70 miles an hour on grasslands and trying to make a cut to try to turn sharply is your feet are going to skid right out under you. It's like watching your kitten trying to get its footing on your tile floor. It's funny. They just, right? So if you're a cheetah, you need a track shoe. You need spikes down there. You need something that is the equivalent of a track shoe that's going to dig in and hold your traction as you make these turns. So you can't have a cat foot. You have to have a dog foot. Guess what a cheetah has?
A dog foot?
A permanently extended claws, hard pads, like a dog. And their fur is a combination. Their tight against their body fur is cat fur, and their poofy, fluffy little spot fur is dog fur. And then they are susceptible. They're susceptible to diseases that only attack dogs and cheetahs, and they're susceptible to diseases that attack only cats and cheetahs.
Wow, I didn't know that.
And on top of that, they have great difficulty reproducing. They do not reproduce easily. They out of a litter of 6 to 8, they'll be lucky if 1 or 2 actually can make it out. They are not a well species. They have a lot of genetic garbage in them from the genetic engineering process. These are all things that science just, they just don't want to deal with, and so they don't look at it.
Now, is the cheetah, can you tell me more about the DNA? Did they have an extremely similar DNA between, or less variation, is that right?
They have more variation than your standard wild cat.
Between themselves?
They have a lot of genetic flaws, just like we have a lot of genetic flaws. Cheetahs have a lot of genetic flaws. In the process of cutting and splicing, what the Anunnaki were doing, because they were kind of on a crash program to get it done as fast as they could, they didn't pay attention and do it well. And so that's like in our genome, among our chromosomes, we have over 4,000 and counting, but at least over 4,000 genetic disorders, different genetic disorders, and that's with all people everywhere. So the very first ones of us, the very first 7 breeding pairs that the Anunnaki claim they created, all of them had the same 4,000 genetic disorders plus. You with me? And then others have developed over time in different places, but we have a base of that many, and that can only be there by sloppy work in the genetic engineering process.
Is it true, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, please, Lloyd, that cheetahs within as a species though are genetically very, very close, like within themselves they're almost genetically identical? Is that?
Yes, that's another thing too. Wherever you look at cheetahs, in India, where they live naturally, are found in India, Asia, or China, Asia, China, and Africa, India, Africa, Asia, India, Africa. I'm sorry. Wherever you look, wherever you take a cheetah, they are almost like clones. It is said that you could have two cheetahs lying side by side on the table, skin them, pull their skin off, stitch it back on the other body, and they would heal up and go on as if it didn't happen.
That's incredible. That is incredible. And guys, to our listeners, this is actually quite astonishing stuff, and that's why I brought it up, because, the Star Child skull in itself is amazing information. But this information with the cheetah, that is another scientific proof that exists that something isn't quite right, guys. Okay, this is important stuff.
It is. Well, these are the kinds of things that once you get this stuff out and you start putting this information out, you immediately start drawing the ire of the mainstream, and they start trying to say that, it's nonsense and all of it can be explained and all this. But in some of the early works on cheetahs, where they didn't know, what the landmines that they were laying out there, they were just saying, boy, these things are really crazy. They're like, they're like clones. They just all of, but before there was really any understanding of genetic engineering and that they might have been genetic engineered, there are similarities to dogs, and all of these things are out there and on the record, but they're trying to be obscured now, if not suppressed, by people who understand what knowledge of this means in the wider world.
That's it. And look, this is a groundbreaking. Well, as far as I'm concerned, but I know Dave is burning to ask some questions on intervention as well. Now, the truth is, Lloyd, we could have 10 shows with you easily. and I would love to.
We're definitely coming to the end of this one, so
that's right.
It's like I'll take one more question, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I would love, or we would love to do this again if at all possible. But Dave, I know you're burning to ask something.
From what we've been learning in the last few months, is there's a couple of cohabitating species that have been found in hominoids in China.
There's a lot of mystery about China, a lot of strange things in China, the pyramids, the Dropa, people, the Dropa stones. I mean, there's a lot of mystery in China. They don't try to make it open. But in terms of intervention theory, which I think you guys were referring to, and I have that ebook about intervention theory, what the basic bottom line that I believe is that it looks to me from all my research that Earth has been populated and managed and watched from its very beginning. I call them terraformers. To me, it looks like we're a terraformed planet. We're a terraformed solar system, that all life on Earth has been brought here. I don't think anything is native to here. It all was brought here at some point and allowed to make a home here, and that's everything. I don't think that life spontaneously generates in any form. It has to be brought, whether it's brought in egg form or in actual full species form. I doubt that. I would think more like egg form or something, but we've had so many catastrophes that have wiped us out almost down to the bone in terms of life on Earth. And with just in a matter of a few thousand years, we're pretty much back up to full speed with a new set of animals that can make it in the new environment, whatever the catastrophe has created, whatever new environment. That environment gets a new set of species. Now, what science says is that, well, no, evolution just goes into a high gear when there are open niches. Evolution kicks into a high gear and fills them. What could be more ridiculous? It either goes or it doesn't go. It's either evolution or it's not evolution. It's not evolution high and evolution low. It isn't evolution light and evolution heavy, or fast and evolution slow. It's evolution. If it's true, it can only do what it can do at the speed it can do it. It can't hit the accelerator when there's an opportunity to do so. There's something else going on, and so that's what I mean by intervention. I think terraformers intervene all the time.
Yeah. And I urge our listeners to look up things like the Cambrian explosion, the mystery of flowering plants, and it is a mystery, and of course the great dyings that Lloyd has referred to. They're actually cycles of death that hit us, frequently.
Well, you guys have the intervention theory ebook there, and I guarantee you that if you will spend the 3 hours it takes to go through it, you'll come away from those 3 hours with your head completely on in a different way. You will know things you can't really imagine right now. And I urge anyone listening, if you want a real education about the strangeness of the world we live in and what really might be the truth, I really feel that you will be satisfied, more than satisfied, with Intervention Theory Essentials. And I'm not just trying to sell extra books. I just really firmly believe that it does a favor to anyone who reads it, and the Star Child Essentials ebook as well. I keep the cost is inexpensive. I keep them inexpensive, so people will be inclined to get them and read them and educate themselves about these things.
Yes. And look, and this is a great segue towards the closing, but think about how much money you spend on things that you don't really need and that are really, superfluous to your life. This is important stuff. This is life-changing stuff. This is an alternate, in fact, I think the correct theory about how things are going on, okay? So,
well, I'll tell you one thing it'll do for sure. It will make you the smartest person in any room, in any party, in any gathering of people. When somehow the subject switches to UFOs and aliens, which it does occasionally, or hominoids or anything, you will be the smartest person in that group, and you will be able to show them you're on the ball and you know some stuff. And it's always a good feeling to do that.
You're absolutely correct, and we can both vouch for it. Dave and I, we have gone through the material, so you definitely want to do that. Now, Lloyd, as I said, it would be awesome to have you on again one day, if that's at all possible.
I'm not saying it's not, guys. I'm just saying not in the near future, because we're really up against it trying to get this thing done with the Star Child. But I appreciate having this opportunity. It just popped up out of nowhere, and you guys were in the right place at the right time, and things have worked out, and I'm glad. So let's just call it that. Good luck and go with it.
Thank you. And no, we really, really would like to thank you to make the time for us. But really, it's an honor and it was a privilege, I have to say.
Yeah. I am glad it happened the way it did. It's been a pleasure talking to you guys. You're obviously very knowledgeable and very enthusiastic about the subjects, and you make it fun for people like me, and I can recommend it to anybody.
Well, thank you.
Lloyd, thank you very much for your time today.
More than welcome, guys. More than welcome.
All right. Well, that's brought us to the end of the show. I'm sorry, callers, you couldn't get in. We always jam-pack our shows full of stuff, and Lloyd is no exception to that. Thank you very much, Lloyd, for all your time, and thank you today. Thank you, everyone that's been in the chat room. We'll be posting all the links. Don't forget, in the chat as we go. They'll be in the show notes. Also, this will be put onto YouTube. In fact, if you are listening to YouTube, please come to freedomslips.com. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. Get up to date with what we're doing. Join the chat, join the show, and we'll see you next week for another Shiny Side Out.
With David
and Becky.